Welcome to this study of Chögyam Trungpa's very helpful, wonderfully useful instructions on Buddhist meditation entitled "The Path is the Goal." So, of course, I'd like to start off saying that in engaging in this study, I'm rather awed because of you could say, the greatness of this, the profundity and the clarity. And as such, I'd like to say my motivation in doing this is essentially to bring about the actual study, a bit like taking the horse to the water. And hence, I hope everyone present is reading the book. And even though I'm not directly a student of the Vidyadhara, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche myself, he's really been key to my Buddhist journey, and you could say that this study and also other studies we have done of Rinpoche's works are really implicitly a homage to him and his teaching. Of course, there will be you could say highly qualified students out there who can convey Rinpoche's brilliance far better than I can, and in some way I guess we could say this is a sort of an experiment how someone like myself perceives Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings. Anyway, it's been close to 40 years that I've been studying Trungpa Rinpoche's works, and so hopefully I'll be able to do some justice to this. If not, this comes with a lot of respect for the subject matter. Now, there will be places where I'm going to be offering explanation beyond just what the text says. Not that many places, but of course it could be that the text is clear to you, but sometimes, you know, I feel that I feel committed to, you could say, the objective of the text, and so I occasionally feel that there are some things that might require some further unpacking. Now, this comes from, you could say, my own path, and also sometimes from meeting other fellow students of Buddhism where I think some things might need some clarification. In general, I refer to the Vidyadhara Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche as Trungpa Rinpoche. Sometimes in the notes I put in VCTR, which then refers to Trungpa Rinpoche. So, let's, let me just see here, there's one person who's saying, I cannot hear anything. Let me just text that person. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not hearing back, so I'm just going to proceed. Good. So this teaching was given at two places, namely New York City and Trungpa Rinpoche's probably first Dharma center, which at the time was referred to as Tail of the Tiger. It's now called Kamacholing, and it's in Vermont. And these teachings were given in 1974. Now, if you read the foreword, which was written by Chögyam, Michael Cohn, it was written 20 years after the teachings were actually given. Chögyam highlights the, you could say, need for the Dharma in the West with the anecdote about His Holiness the Karmapa coming to Hong Kong and actually weeping as he realized how many people there lived without any clear vision of their life. And goes on to identify how Trungpa Rinpoche, he actually took on this civilization, brought to, you could say, Western modernity, the vision of the Dharma, and more particularly actually taught people the practice of meditation. Trungpa Rinpoche being very clear about the importance of meditation, is that the sitting practice of meditation is the only way. Meditation, we could say, as an extension of our intellectual understanding, is a way of practically establishing a gap in our, you could say, disastrous maneuvering, which brings about confusion and suffering. It is to begin to experience reality amidst the ongoing, you could say, darkness of our confusion. So it's a bit like creating a gap in this confusion and some sort of cracks in which light can come through. In addition to teaching students about meditation, then Trungpa Rinpoche also famously addressed the issue of spiritual materialism, which is when, you could say, our insecure agenda of ego hijacks the spiritual path, links it to its own agenda. And as Sherpa Chögyam points out, bringing to the students this sort of critical perspective, he also, once the students were actually engaged in the path, he also looked after them, nurtured and encouraged them. Anyway, what we have here is an outline of the essence of meditation, what we call shamatha and vipassana, we could say peace and wider perspective. And it actually, shamatha and vipassana will be, you could say, translated and defined in various ways. And in here, Trungpa Rinpoche then stresses how the indispensable foundation for the practice of the Buddha Dharma and the path of awakening is then meditation. Now, the purpose of this book is then to establish an understanding of the practice of meditation and the Buddhist attitude towards enlightenment. You can say the latter is more implicit. And in doing that, then Trungpa Rinpoche presents meditation in terms of what we could say the journey of the discipline through the path and what is sometimes referred to as the three-yana process: Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And it's important in appreciating this Trungpa Rinpoche's approach is really, it comes very much from Trungpa Rinpoche's vast realization, and in many ways we could say the vast perspective of the higher teachings, Mahamudra and Mahasandhi, or Mahaati or Dzogchen. So while we do specify the foundational aspects, then also we have implicit really continually the presence of, you could say, the vast perspective of the higher vehicles. Nevertheless, Trungpa Rinpoche, he makes stresses how we want to begin at square one. And he actually talks about how students who already have been exposed to meditation, they actually need to be retaught. So it doesn't matter whether people are new or whether they experienced, it's essential that we have a proper understanding of meditation and we understand then how it has something to do with enlightenment. So this is explained, Trungpa Rinpoche explains this, approaches this in terms of the student's gradual development, these three yanas, the Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, and he describes a gradual path of organic development in this or these perspectives, in terms of the experience that happens and in terms of the corresponding discipline of the student. So Trungpa Rinpoche makes a point of that we need to start at the beginning, creating a solid foundation. He says otherwise it's like building on sand. By the way, if you have the Shambhala edition of this text from 2011, down in the left-hand corner I put in the page number followed by the paragraph number. So the first, what we just covered in this slide here, covers the content on pages 3, first paragraph, to page 4, second paragraph. So when we talk about the practice of meditation, we're talking about shamatha and vipassana. And we can say shamatha is mindfulness, vipassana is awareness. And this is common, runs as a red thread across all Buddhist traditions. It is common to all Buddhists, all practitioners, all practices. So through the practice of meditation, we eliminate deception and we realize innate intelligence. Classically, we define the Buddhist path in terms of these two aspects, elimination and realization. So regardless how we might feel about it, whether we have a romantic approach or a rational approach, whatever, meditation remains the only way to actually travel, experience the path. So the point here really is that regardless of who we are, we need to meditate. And the practice of meditation unmasks our deception, bringing out our intelligence. In the Myth of Freedom, Trungpa Rinpoche, he says, this is another of Trungpa Rinpoche's works, a classic, you could say. And in here he says, quite possibly, there is no such thing as spiritual practice except stepping out of self-deception, stopping our struggle to get hold of spiritual states. End of quote. And so, like I said, the path is traditionally defined in terms of these two aspects of elimination and realization. So as we let go of self-deception, our trips, and Trungpa Rinpoche, say in many ways, is addressing the 1970s American audience, but of course so much of the vernacular still applies. So when we let go of these trips of self-deception or patterns, it's not as if we are divested of some perceived vivid personality. Rather, it's the opposite. We uncover and unleash an innate reserve of insight and qualities, which are then what we associate with Buddha nature. We speak about, you could say, the assertive aspect of the path. Sometimes we talk about the path in a very deconstructive, analytical, critical way, where we basically dismantle our assumptions. And then sometimes also we talk about, you could say, the positive aspects or the assertive aspects of awakening in terms of like compassion, wisdom, strength, and so forth. But either way, when we practice meditation, we might perceive this open space that we're no longer, you could say, engaging our expectations, projections, and so forth. We might perceive this open space in various ways. We might sometimes perceive it as an encouragement, sometimes it might seem overwhelming, but we could say regardless, relating to what actually is, to reality, as per the Buddha, is the only way. Now, meditation enables us to realize truth as an immediate reality. It is about perceiving where we are, what we are, as something workable. And in engaging in this approach, we are following in the footsteps of 2,500 years of tried and tested methodology and a living tradition that has been passed through a lineage of great masters, great individuals. So of course in this work, Trungpa Rinpoche, he talks about the fundamental truth, the basic truth, which is of course interesting in what we could say a postmodern climate of the 1970s. To talk about truth is something that we generally can be rather suspicious about. And we can say the audience that he's talking to might have been very receptive. Presently we can say in the West, in Western modernity, we continue to have a justified suspicion of truth as something that's complex, relative, etc. What's true for one person is not necessarily true for others. The thing is, in this present context, we're touching on truth in a different way, not as an absolute, but more as an immediate subjective capacity for not being deceived, for some degree of non-delusion. So, although you could say truth might be a contentious area of Western thought, discourse, etc., it is the basic premise for an experience of what the Buddha has taught. So, especially in meditation, we can identify how we, on a very immediate individual level, get caught by invalid assumptions and so forth, and how this can be remedied through the simplicity of grounding in mindfulness and awareness. So, practically speaking, through meditation, we gain a vision of truth as a very real potential, as an already present reality, and hence the title of the book here, The Goal is the Path. And also working with the reality of then who we are, we talk about the path is the goal. So this sort of back and forth between these two, the goal as the path, you could say truth, and also working with who we are, the path. We understand we are not talking about mythology, and Trungpa makes a point about how this has been done by countless individuals since the time of the Buddha, and this is then what we call a lineage of enlightened teachers. We share experience with these masters of the past. We share the same, you could say, enlightened DNA. So even though our context, culture, and so forth might be different, we share a very basic common disposition, what we call Buddha nature. Now, this is interesting. When we talk about meditation, we very often think, well, we're going to meditate as an act or a verb. No, I am meditating. But we'd want to understand and expand our understanding about meditation a little bit. And Trungpa just says here, it's not a verb, it's a noun. We talk about engaging in a state of meditation. So in doing that, we're actually not, you could say, performing in any way. We just sit in this presence. We have no aim, we have no purpose, we have no reference point. That being said, this is the best thing we could ever do. So, meditation not being something we do, it's not an action. It is rather a way of being. Here we are referring to what in Sanskrit is known as jhana, or written jhana, or samadhi, in Tibetan samten or tingensin. Now, just sort of off the record, there is a term, you could say, in Tibetan and Sanskrit, bhavana and gom, but that is a verb for meditation. But the point here is that that object in, or the space where we're actually setting ourselves, it needs to be understood in terms of its unconditional quality. So this point about meditation being a noun refers to, you could say, a self-existing quality of settling into this space of not doing anything at all. We have no purpose or reference point. So this is not about just hanging out or chilling out, but it's about being fully present, being. So doing this, we could perhaps at one point resent then this non-doing. We could even suspect what we are engaging in. But as we shall see, the argument will be made for this non-doing is something very powerful. This we're going to substantiate throughout the study here. And as a matter of fact, this is the best thing that we could ever do. Now the thing is, we've never really actually sat down. We sometimes have been inactive, but then we generally gravitate towards some sort of activity or distraction. So what we do here is properly sitting without hanging out, and we're also not sort of on our way to something else. We're not perching. Doing this has tremendous merit. It really creates a condition for genuine presence, genuine wisdom, genuine Dharma. So sitting is something that is very dignified, it's brave, it comes with extraordinary sanity. So the truth of the matter is, in our lives we have never really sat. We have never been taught to sit, and while we might have had these bored moments of not doing anything, we have never sat fully, wholeheartedly like a rock. So not having done this ever, we are actually, you could say, entering new territory. Doing this has tremendous merit. We're breaking through some of our habitual patterning and touching on something that has deep roots within, as we discussed before, some fundamental dimension of truth. So the extraordinary conditions we actually require to see through such a delusion requires a lot of merit, and also you could say we create more merit, more you could say good circumstances for pursuing this clearing away of delusion. The mere fact that we are willing to do this, to actually sit, is very powerful. As Trungpa Rinpoche says, it overrides in its power the atom bomb. The attitude is one of bravery. The commitment is magnificent. It is overall extraordinarily sane. Now coming back to this sitting, we're always on our way, rushing, and what we're going to propose here is that we might be willing to actually waste time, be non-productive. In fact, letting the whole issue of time give it a rest. And in doing so, we could develop a new relationship to time, possibly discover uncontaminated virgin time. Now in general, we usually sit on chairs above the ground, or we're traveling in our cars. We don't actually connect with the ground. Now this being said, it's all right to sit when we do meditation. We can sit on chairs, but the point here is that we need to establish some familiarity with sitting without a purpose. So in that we're usually on our way somewhere to some destination, rushing. From that point of view being very effective and so on, sitting on a cushion is outrageous. Sitting without a purpose is unthinkable. We might think it's terrible, we would be wasting our time, as Trungpa Rinpoche says. So Trungpa Rinpoche suggests wasting time could be a good thing. We could for once give time a rest. We could create virgin time, which is uncontaminated by our agendas, aggression, passion, and speed. We could sit and experience, create such pure time. Now, in doing this, we are then, you could say, discovering a new, freer dimension where we might not be caught. We could effectively eliminate passion, aggression, and the other styles of confusion that causes our suffering. So right now this needs to be understood. The actual technique will address that later. Right now it's just about making a strong argument how it's important to sit like a rock. Of course, we could say that it's very cool, this emphasis on wasting time. But the thing is, it's not about being cute. What we're talking about here in the Buddhist context is something that's immensely important. It's about addressing the very core of our confusion, the very confusion that lies at the base of all our neurotic actions on a personal level, on a societal level, as well as a worldwide level. So this is not just being, you could say, cool, but it is really addressing something vast and immensely important. As far as the practice goes, then it might sound impractical. But we'd want to take this possibility into consideration. And I think also now, this actually being studied 40 years after the teaching was given, somehow the practice of meditation has won some mainstream acceptance. So once we have rationally and intuitively established the validity of this kind of practice, sitting like a rock, then we need to actually do it. Trungpa Rinpoche highlights how the Buddha did it, and everyone since him has done it. This is what could practically address our confusion and all the, you could say, neurotic practices of our confusion, namely passion, aggression, and their very causes, ignorance. So right now we just want to be really clear on the value of trying this possibility, sitting, not doing anything. And this Trungpa Rinpoche refers to as the first and foremost message of the Buddha. The message, or this instruction, comes from the Vidyadhara Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's Kagyu lineage, one of the, you could say, one of the famous 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And the Kagyus are really famous as the practice lineage. They're not the only ones who practice, but in the Kagyu tradition there is a greater emphasis on actually sitting, on a meditation. So this is not just about theory then. This is not an intelligent proposition. This is something that has been done by countless individuals. So we have this, you could say, sense of heritage, family or lineage. And this is not blood lineage, obviously. In engaging in this, in considering this possibility, we are connecting to others like-minded who have done what we might be doing. Others have gone before us. So we have some family, our lineage. Now, as we do this, there are some foundational aspects of the entire Buddhist teaching, which are 3 aspects of discipline, which are then Shila, which means discipline, and then also Samadhi, the practice of meditation, and then Prajna, you could say what is the vision. So to do this properly, we are about to, you could say, enter into a clearer, more aware dimension of knowing our subjectivity, and this requires that we, you could say, renounce some of our superficiality and speed. We need to slow down, and in doing that we need to experience boredom. Now, at a very foundational level, what we call the Hinayana, and by the way, the Hinayana is, you could say, not necessarily something we equate with some particular tradition, living tradition. It's more, you could say, the foundation of our practice. This is the place where we deal with ourselves on a very personal level. So this is what we refer to as the foundation of the Buddhist path. So this Hinayana level, in here we encounter the aspects of discipline, meditation and knowledge, Shila, Samadhi and Prajna. Now the Shila is then discipline or ethics, Samadhi is meditation, and Prajna is intellect, or it's also sometimes translated as insight, intelligence or wisdom. These 3 together, they are referred to as the 3 trainings, and they actually sum up what we could call the Noble Eightfold Path. So to even embark on the first training or discipline, Trungpa Rinpoche points out that we need to learn to slow down. We need to learn how to be, to become apprentices as our Buddha apprentices. And there we then pursue these trainings. We have to relate with who we are and discover sanity. And that involves not pacing after our expectations and being governed by our restlessness, we need to actually slow down. And from, you could say, our expectations point of view, from our insecure ego that continually needs affirmation, this involves boredom. We need to be grounded and experience boredom to begin appreciating our innate, unconditional sanity. This is not something opposed to insanity, but it's merely that we begin to experience our unconditional ground, what we actually are. So we're coming around to halfway through the session, and I'll just like to see if there are any questions at this point. So, oh, I'm glad the person who couldn't hear before now can hear, so that's good. There's a question. It seems that in Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's presentation of meditation, there is a very holistic approach. Is this more the approach of the union of shamatha and vipassana? Yes, indeed it is. And so this we'll return to later. In fact, shortly in the next chapter. So yes, we very much approach shamatha and vipassana as a unity. It's sometimes explained apart, but in practice, it's you could say practiced as a unity. Another question is, does boredom mean to being happy to have no agenda or expectations? Well, this is the tricky part. This is subtle because, of course, having no agenda or expectations, we might just feel cool and happy. So that, you could say, identifying with such a new project of having no agenda or expectation, that could itself be, you'd say, another credential for our ego. So actually this is a place where we actually go in some unknown territory where they're not familiar reference points and not familiar, you could say, entertainment, and our expectations are not being met. But yes, we do also talk about cool boredom, which is then the familiarity then, which indeed is endowed with this absence of agenda or expectations. Okay. Now at the end of the chapters there are some questions. Now the questions, and I hope you'll read them because they're actually really good. I'm very impressed with the audience there. If you think of it, some of them are young people, possibly just fresh out of college, and really brilliant questions if you ask me. So I want to include them. Of course, because of the time restraint, I'm going to summarize, and so you should be aware that what you see on the slide here is actually not verbatim, neither the questions nor the answers. This is just what I got out of it in my attempt to summarize it. So the first question is, what is merit? And Trungpa Rinpoche answers that merit is a sense of richness and a sense of reward, which can only develop when we're not creating further complications in our confusion. Just sitting and doing nothing is the best way of all to produce merit. And in one of the sutras, on several, it talks about the value of just doing meditation has tremendous merit, and just the sitting in meditation for the time it would take an ant to crawl across the bridge of our nose has infinite merit, like accumulating the merit, kind of merit that we would have from offering to the Buddhas throughout eons. So we can't overstate we can't overstate the value of the merit of meditation. Could you say something about the difference between the complexity and the complicated structure of our neurosis and what maybe could be called the simple richness of sanity. So this student already is on to, you could say, how our neurosis could be transformed into sanity. So in answering, Trungpa Rinpoche says that complexity could be seen as something very simple. It's complex, but it becomes simple. So he sees no problem. It's as if you're looking up at the sky and you see the stars. There's thousands of them. It seems very complicated. It would be difficult to name all of them, to find out what they are, and so on. But if we look up at the night sky, there's some sense of simplicity as well. So you could say that both confusion and complexity could be an expression of simplicity. When is discipline needed? And there's a long answer for that. And when is it not needed? So Trungpa Rinpoche makes a point about the rules and regulations that we find in Buddhism. They have a lot of justification. They are very powerful. But he goes on to say that it really is about ultimately providing a space for openness. And these rules, they enable us to go beyond our ordinary limitations. To see our hang-ups as predictable circumstances that don't necessarily have to be intrinsically problematic. They are what we have. So if we didn't have that kind of endorsement of what we are, we would be completely sterile. He compares it to a hospital corridor. So we work with what is. We delight in the challenges and the bends in our journey, in the road of our journey. Trungpa Rinpoche, and this is then verbatim from the book, we should feel grateful that we are in this samsaric world, that we can tread the path, that we are not sterile, completely cleaned out, that the world has not been taken over by some computerized system. There's still room for rawness and ruggedness and roughness all over the place. Good luck. So I'd also like at this point to say that the formulations of Trungpa Rinpoche, they might sometimes seem at odds with formulations we find in other Buddhist cultures, other ways of explaining the path. So I'd like to say that Trungpa Rinpoche comes with a wider perspective of not merely the theory of Buddhism, but also the practice, and with a keen awareness of the target audience, and understanding how the audience will hear these answers. So, for example, in this case, promoting the idea of discipline as being righteous, of course the audience would misconstrue as, well, the audience would misconstrue discipline as some sort of righteous way of action and so forth. This is not what it's about. So this is really where Trungpa Rinpoche's brilliance is unparalleled. And so in his teaching, he preempts some of the unfortunate misunderstanding that easily takes place in translation. So here, we should appreciate this inconceivable, valuable situation to have a realized master who also masters the language of those to whom he's speaking. Now, Chapter 2, continuing our confusion. It's important that we don't think meditation is about self-improvement, but about working with what is. We are establishing some parameters of peace through shamatha, and this enables us to be clear about who we are beautifully as we are. So meditation doesn't put an end to one's confusion or aggression, passion, etc., but it enables us to work or have a vision of how we are, have some sense of transparency. So it's about seeing clearly. But to see clearly, we need to have some peace, and this is where we work with shamatha. So this development of peace, of shamatha, it refers more to being accurate, being precise, rather than escaping pain and gaining some transcendental pleasure or bliss. We suffer when we fail to relate to the natural harmony of reality, so we live then in conflict with what is. So shamatha is something that enables us to connect properly with what is. Trungpa Rinpoche talks of being, quote, able to see ourselves completely, perfectly, beautifully as we are, absolutely as we are, end of quote. So successfully practicing shamatha does not necessarily mean we have some new personal achievement, but it is about being precise and relating to our existing reality. It's not about something being right and something being wrong. So you could say we need to be aware that the possibility of our understanding of meditation may be subject to some cultural or linguistic assumptions. We tend to focus on achievement. This is very often what we have, this thing, you know, the sort of proverbial spa that offers meditation, and you see some wonderful, beautiful person sitting there in bliss and so forth, and there's this sort of setting up an ambitious project somehow that we should achieve something in terms of beautifying or improving ourselves. So definitely shamatha is a way of unfolding our potential, but it's not about becoming something that we are presently not. It's about understanding a more unconditional potential, which is already completely spontaneously present within us. So mindfulness or shamatha is about relating to our basic level of what is. So it could also mean that when we say mindfulness, we sometimes think of being careful, like we're warned. But this is not what we mean. Trungpa Rinpoche says, quote, mindfulness means that you could be a wholesome person, a completely wholesome person, rather than you should not be doing this or that. So it's not about doing something to address personal issues such as our mindless distractions, because such an attitude can lead to perceiving oneself as having a problem with attention span, and at the end we end up having meditation leaving us feeling inadequate, like we are somehow flawed, or as Rinpoche says, a naughty boy or girl. Shamatha is being simple. It's just being watchful. We could have some problems if we regard it as incorporating or importing something new, a foreign technique. But again, shamatha is about relating to what is. Shamatha is developing harmony, openness, being simple, keeping a watchful eye. So there indeed are techniques and various explanations and so forth, and the thing is, you could say shamatha is something we need to practice. What happens is then sometimes also when we hear of these explanations and so forth, then we get a bit overwhelmed, and then we just have a romantic inclinations like this is something extraordinary and I'd like to connect with it. And then as we sit and we're actually trying to handle this great thing, then we feel a bit burdened, and Trungpa Rinpoche gives the image of a young burdened donkey out on ice, unable to get a grip. So we could end up being frustrated that and overwhelmed by the meditation practice, and this is really because we don't identify with what is actually being said. It's as if we want something unwieldy and big, and we'd want to rather engage. We might also have, you could say, a teacher there, and we feel obliged, and there's some pressure. But at the end of the day, where this becomes simple is when we begin to simply relate to who we are and our immediate experience. So Trungpa Rinpoche then emphasizes how it is essential, however, that we actually do this, that we actually begin to engage in this practice of being properly present. And we say the practice of shamatha meditation is one of the most basic practices for becoming a good Buddhist, a well-trained person. Without that, you cannot even step toward a personal understanding of the true Buddha Dharma, end of quote. So we are not engaging in any mystery or metaphysics. We're not engaging in religion or any kind. We are working with the subjective mind in its everyday experience. Even issues that we might have, nirvana, karma, or issues that we come across in Buddhism, nirvana, karma, reincarnation, and so forth, should be understood in this, you could say, empirical way. So we're not at any time importing some sort of mythology or belief. The Buddha worked with himself, and we're following his example. Others have done so, and so we partake in a living culture of enlightenment. Our technique is identifying with our breath, identifying with walking. We focus gently on either of these, and through doing that we allow some experience of relaxation or gap. It's not that thoughts are going to stop, but we shift our attentions from the thought. They no longer, you could say, impose the same tyranny on us. So it's not about stopping thoughts or blocking or excluding sense perceptions in any kind. There's, you could say our technique is identifying with our breath or walking. So we do so. There's a famous story of one of the Buddha's students, who called Shona, incidentally, and he was a musician turned meditator who the Buddha instructed to tune his mind as he would tune the strings of his veena, without making the strings too loose or too tight. So with just the right level of attention, we place 25% of our attention on the breathing or the walking, and the rest is left open and relaxed. We're not blocking or excluding the sense perceptions as we sit. So this doesn't mean that we're engaging the senses. This doesn't mean that we're beginning to bring senses onto the path as we might do in a more advanced practice such as Vajrayana. We're just being practical. We're going to be sitting in places where there are noises. And even if we were to go to the Himalayas, believe me, there are a lot of noises out in the hills of the Himalayas as well. So sensory deprivation is not what we're about to do. We allow perceptions. And also we need to be willing to just allow spaciousness and gap. So this kind of relaxed, open attitude is very important. If we're too tight, this creates psychological reactions. So in the Samadhi Raj Sutra, it talks about 4 wheels or aspects of technique: concentration, openness, awareness, and expectation. And we could sort of have some sense of the 25% concentration on our breath or our walking meditation, and the rest we live open. And Trungpa Rinpoche explains in terms of the focus on our breath. He says we really just keep that focus on as sort of like on the verge of technique. So we have this attention to the breath or the walking. That's 25%. Then another 25% is relaxing, and a further 25% relates to making friends with ourselves, which is 25% awareness. And the last 25% connect with expectation. Your mind is open to the possibility of something happening during this session of practice. And the whole thing is synchronized completely. So the simplicity of this technique, we're really just sitting and relating to our breath as per our instructions. Some of us might be practicing in various ways. This even would apply to whatever other meditation technique you have, but bringing your focus back to whatever it is that is the object of your focus. This is what we refer to as then the 25% of concentration or attention. And then as we do that, then also we have these other aspects of relaxing, awareness, and expectation. There's some sense of, you could say, potential for it going somewhere. We are doing something, no doubt. We're just not cultivating expectation, but we're aware of where this could lead. So there is a vision in what we're doing here. So anyway, the simplicity of, you could say, any Buddhist meditation actually doesn't really allow for spiritual materialism. We breathe and we walk. In the case of some, we won't be able to walk. We might be challenged. But anyway, we relate to this simplicity of the technique. So this is very immediate, very practical. Now, particularly as we sit, we also allow our out-breath to mingle with space. And this is an instruction that comes from Gampopa's commentary on the Samadhi-Raj Sutra. And this also is taken, you could say, to a greater depth in the practice of Vajrayana. But it is something that we have right from the start. And it is really the basis for practicing shamatha in unity with vipassana. Now, combining shamatha, mindfulness, with the awareness of vipassana is very important. We, through that, we discover a wider perspective, which is what vipassana means, and the possibility of letting go of some of our insecurity and some of our, you could say, narrowness, what we could refer to as ego. So this comes with the possibility of egolessness. And we relate back to the, you could say, the precision that we bring to this, which is the aspect of shamatha. So in combining shamatha and vipassana, mindfulness then becomes more than just being attentive, it becomes awareness. Mindfulness is, you could say, the precise engagement in the present experience of our being, bodily, mentally. Awareness is acknowledging the whole thing. As we sit, then we are aware of what's taking place, and there is a greater expansive, you could say, feeling or perspective. And Trungpa Rinpoche refers to this as being the first experience of egolessness. Here you could say we discover a decentralized awareness. We come back to the breath, thoughts are there, but we're not fixating on them. So we discover awareness without bias towards merely ourselves. Usually all our awareness is focused about how am I doing. But here we're actually just coming back to the breath, thoughts arise, and we don't necessarily prioritize them. So in that we have, at least to some extent, less bias towards ourselves, we begin to develop a wider perspective, which is vipassana. So this particularly brings about a sense of precision, which Trungpa Rinpoche states as, quote, the main quality of awareness in the early stage of the practice of meditation. Now here then, when we talk about vipassana, this awareness is where we begin to experience the lack of object. We're not fixating on this, whatever objects appear. We have thoughts, but we come back to the object of our attention, our breath, we relax and so forth. And this decentralized perspective then brings about egolessness. And also incidentally, we here also are discontinuing our fixation on ourselves. So there's also not really any focus on the subject that experiences this. Trungpa Rinpoche states how that ordinarily we understand egolessness in the context, Trungpa Rinpoche, no, this is prior to what Trungpa Rinpoche, this is actually something that I want to make a point about, because ordinarily when we talk about egolessness, very often Buddhists, they have this from an intellectual appreciation, from studies, from analysis and so forth. We can analyze and we can see how there is no self or ego, or we can be philosophical and identify or establish how phenomena and self don't have inherent existence. But what we're doing here is taking this analytical certainty a lot further. And this is about actually experiencing it in sitting meditation. So the instruction here of not following after our thoughts and settling in mindfulness and simplicity, our emerging wider awareness, or vipassana, holds, doesn't fixate on any particular object. Everything then is, you could say, approached in a much more open manner. So Trungpa Rinpoche states, quote, "Awareness brings egolessness because there is no object of awareness." So then we might say, well, who is it who is aware of this then? Well, at this point, nobody really. It's awareness that is just aware of itself without any particular object and even without any particular subject. It's a bit like when we have a razor. It's sharp. It is in and of itself sharp without necessarily having to have an object. It's like the light of the sun. It illuminates itself. Yes, it can illuminate objects, but also the sun is radiant or illuminating itself. Similarly with fire, it has heat in and of itself. So all these qualities of vipassana actually can exist without objects. So this is what we call self-illuminating awareness, knowing itself. So of course we have a lot of logical reasoning that, particularly in the Mahayana, very sophisticated language for this. So some Mahayanists, they might actually object and find this kind of initial foundational logic very crude. It's very intuitive, it's not logical and so forth, but this is actually where we begin to have this experience of egolessness in our vipassana experience. As some might predict, I might be running a little bit over time. I hope I may beg your forgiveness and indulgence. Let's see, we might go just 10 minutes over time, something like that. So we'd want to understand mindfulness as awareness, and this awareness should then be understood in terms of 4 foundational aspects of our mindfulness practice. So we are here then talking about shamatha and vipassana together, and these two can be understood in terms of what we call satipatthana, which has 4 aspects to it. Now there is in the Pali Canon what we call the Satipatthana Sutta, which defines mindfulness, the 4 aspects of mindfulness in terms of mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of thoughts, and mindfulness of phenomena. However, Trungpa Rinpoche here refers to another set of 4 aspects of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of body, mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of livelihood, and mindfulness of effort. So I'm going to actually, when I send out the link for downloading this this session, I'm also going to include Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching. It's a beautiful little short piece on these 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the point really here is that if we wholeheartedly relate to all aspects of experience when we sit, this is the breath, our mind, and whatever we do, then there's nothing that is left untouched. And the technique finally is not something that's external to us. So as per above, we have no one that is practicing, and the vipassana practice itself is not something where we grasp onto something. That's the very nature of it. So with such practice we introduce a wider perspective in which the centralized view on ourselves as the center of the universe becomes redundant. So as a metaphor for this liberation of self from within, Trungpa Rinpoche then points to how when a lion is dead, other animals, they actually don't dare to go near the corpse of the lion, whereas worms coming up from the ground, they enter and devour the corpse from within. So even though the ego might look like a big deal, it is ultimately non-existent and powerless. But if we sort of engage it, confront it, and so forth, that's not going to work. That's just going to fuel its insecurity. So we have this stealth approach of meditation, which, like the ants entering from within, then dismantles our fearful projections. So Trungpa Rinpoche says the worms are like the awareness, the knowledge that realizes egolessness through awareness, vipassana. Again, we have at the end of this chapter some questions, and again here I am really just summarizing the questions. I'd like to encourage you to not skip over the questions and answers, because they're really very good. How do you characterize the unity of shamatha and vipassana? So Trungpa Rinpoche speaks about this being the simultaneous currents of shamatha of precision and the vipassana of openness. So then the person questioning follows up saying, but isn't this naturally something that happens? And so Trungpa Rinpoche says then, yes, this is why we then speak of this unity of, or rather this is why we speak of the technique as shamatha vipassana. They come together, one-shot deal. And this unity continues developed even to the highest level of the path, at the level of Mahamudra or Dzogchen, what we also call Ati Yoga. So then the question is, well, then why refer to them as two? So Trungpa Rinpoche says they work together, yet they are distinct, and like I said before, they are explained really in terms of their distinctive qualities. Trungpa Rinpoche goes on to explain that at the level of the sixth bhumi, then when the bodhisattva has perfected the paramita of prajna, then again, and with the prajna, the you could say perfecting the quality of vipassana, then again the aspect of shamatha is again stressed as a further way of developing this vipassana. And the same person then asks, is it that the openness of vipassana without shamatha could become too loose? And so Trungpa Rinpoche says, yes, that's exactly it. It could lose its perspective. And then he goes on to describe how within the Vajrayana there are various levels at which the integration of phenomena and the purity of phenomena is then, you could say, the aspect of shamatha, and how shamatha then, you could say, engaging with phenomena comes with this quality of precision. The next question is, could you clarify satipatthana, which is then essentially satipatthana refers to this settling our intelligence, settling our cognitive capacity. So that's, the Tibetan is Drempa Nyeshak, and the Sanskrit is Smiti Upasthana. But it means that basically we're present. So that presence, of course, translates beyond just the shamatha and vipassana of meditation. It spills into our life in general. Anyway, the question then is, could you clarify this quality of satipatthana? And Trungpa Rinpoche says, this is basic mindfulness that pervades both shamatha and vipassana. It is resting your cognitive mind, and it has these four aspects. This is the indispensable foundation for all Buddhist practice. It's the foundation of our house. Hence we speak of these four foundations of mindfulness. And without these, we're unable to appreciate the further practices of Mahayana, Vajrayana, and so forth, and even the present Hinayana. So without actually that processing, then we don't have the acceptance of what we are. And this acceptance is something that needs to be developed. So we need to have this groundwork, and so we initially operate with this narrow foundational path and of working with who we are, what we are, fully accepting who we are. And Trungpa Rinpoche says this is not necessarily all about fun. He writes it is very difficult with quite a few R's in the very. But then again, going through this is what enables the, what you could say, the golden Buddhist, or someone who actually properly is processed by the path. So then the question is, with awareness of space, is there no longer a watcher? And the answer is, briefly, yes, it is. Indeed, there is a watcher, but the watcher becomes a vehicle. You could say initially the watcher has this quality of being the voice of reason, the voice of intelligence. Then another question is, with the 25% distribution of attention on the four aspects, what about the breath? So we had, you could say, attention to the breath, then also the quality of openness, the quality of awareness, making friends with ourselves, and then finally also the aspect of expectation, or the potential. And so the answer here is then that how do we actually handle these four aspects? And Trungpa Rinpoche brings about a contemporary sort of image that when we go to the movies, it seems that we manage to focus on the screen and at the same time on popcorn, and maybe also having a soft drink, Coca-Cola. And we actually might allocate 25 or 50% of attention on what we're watching, but we also notice the popcorn as well as the Coke. So all of this joins together in a complete focus and also having a good time. And then the question is, you warned against being the watcher. And Trungpa Rinpoche answers, well, you actually can't really be the watcher, but you can be aware of how attempting to sustain or fixate on the watcher is what expands the problem. But it's not as if we all of a sudden can just get rid of the watcher. So as a boss mentioned earlier, we make this a vehicle, and so we leave it without furthering its perceived existence. Sorry. And this is interesting. I seem to perceive other people's thoughts. Are they really other people's thoughts? How to distinguish between what is my confusion and which are the confusion of others? And this interesting little dialogue sort of boils down to Trungpa just saying, why bother? And the person saying, just to clarify. And Trungpa just saying, well, as we meditate, there's no point in trying to sort these things out. Sometimes we try to sort things out analytically, but here we can't be bothered. We are sloppy in that regard, the Buddhists in general, in regard to mapping all of the aspects of discursive thought. We can't bother about the small change. And then the person says, well, I'm a writer, so I try to record it. And then Trungpa says, well, you should perhaps simplify that would make a bestseller. And he says, I wouldn't know how. And Trungpa is saying, don't try. That's the starting point. And then the question is then, or the person asking then observes, maybe I should make friends with myself. And the Trungpa endorses that. Well said. So in terms of the expectation as the last of these, the four wheels of the chariot that's referred to in the Samadhi Raj Sutra, is that also, you could say, some kind of hope? And Rinpoche says that hope is something that we posit as wishing for in the future, whereas expectation here is more in the sense of the fact that we might be pregnant. We can expect a child. So it's sort of verging on being quite realistic, really, without any sort of hope about something taking place in the future. So then it's about the question, the next question is about what is perfect enlightenment, and what is referred to as perfect enlightenment is that there's absolutely no reference point. There's no sense of I am the enlightened one. I have sort of achieved my, I have fulfilled my expectations. Enlightenment is perfect when there is no reference point. And another place, somewhere else, Trungpa Rinpoche actually refers to enlightenment from the point of view is actually like ego being present at its own funeral. So there's nothing in it in enlightenment, there's nothing in it for ego, if you like. Then there's a question focusing on awareness, as you described, seems like trying to keep on top of things, and that approach only seems to make more confusion. And summarizing everything, just quoting Trungpa Rinpoche, I think the only thing to do is try not to sort out what is better and what is not better. Sorting out produces further problems. Gesundheit. Then the question is, one question and the last one here I believe, is meditation therapy? So Trungpa answers that it's not, meditation is not regarded as medicine or even as therapeutic. It's just an unconditional way of being in life. So this is of course where we could say meditation as the path. Say the scope of the path possibly could be as a medicine, but as we sit and meditate, we are simply just relating unconditionally to what is. And then, are there dangers on the path? And the answer is some advanced practices without grounding in shamatha and vipassana can be dangerous. And this again coming back to credentials and objectifying, clinging, and so forth, is of course what is the danger. If, for example, we have Vajrayana meditation, where we visualize, you could say, Buddha nature. If we think of this as something that's objectified and identify Buddha nature as something that is something real and solid, then Trungpa points out how this actually could lead to enhancing our ego. So this is, of course, where grounding in shamatha and vipassana is indispensable. But he goes on to say, if someone follows a simple technique of meditation, such as watching one's breath, then there is no danger at all. So again, excuses for going a little bit over time. I'm just going to see if there are any questions. Does the idea of getting comfortable wasting time relate to the notion that regardless of the content of our busyness, it is all a waste? Is Rinpoche suggesting that everything we do is equally valid or equally pointless? Not at all, not at all. We're talking about meditation here. And from the point of view of ordinary, conventional, you could say, rationality, then of course sitting and doing nothing is a waste of time. But what we are here doing is discovering a new dimension of our reality. And while conventionally we could say this is a waste of time, we're not obviously not producing anything, then the practice of meditation, in that it enables us to, you could say, gauge a completely new dimension of reality. This is, of course, not at all wasting time. So we're not at all making any kind of value judgment on our ordinary activities. We're really just, you could say, endorsing a different logic when it comes to meditation. And you could say also how meditation seems to be at odds with some of our conventional ideas of being productive, effective, and so forth. Another question. Complexity would seem to involve us complicating. Simplicity is merely accepting. Is that close to what is meant? Yes, I think that sounds very good. Yeah. We look up at the night sky and we see, there's a lot of stars. We don't necessarily need to map them out. Also, like in the case of the writer before, where there is someone who wants to, let's say, sort things out, understand, and make them fit into pigeonholes of our conceptuality. So yes, simplicity is merely just accepting. And of course this particularly applies to when we're meditating. When we are out of meditation, of course that's different. But while we're meditating, we need to allow ourselves to experience this simplicity. Can you expand on the expectation 25%? Again, it's like, I think it was covered in the Q&A. It's a bit like when we are pregnant. We can well assert that there is some realistic possibility that something is going to happen. And this also comes from, you could say, an understanding of the view, to actually understand the logic of meditation. We're not, we could actually see where it is that we're heading. And that's what we mean with view. So we know what we're doing and where we're heading. But we're not sitting there hoping that something is going to take place. So we're sort of well grounded in reality. Another question, is there a sense of profound loneliness in the true experience of meditation? I think this is going to be covered later on, but yes, or rather not so much loneliness, but perhaps what Trungpa Rinpoche refers to as aloneness. It's something we need to do on our own. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's study. So thank you again for joining in, and the next session will then be about chapters 3 and then in part 2 chapter 1. Thank you very much for coming, and as you know, I'll conclude with a classical a verse of dedication. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. Thank you very much.